Would you believe that a forest could grow not from trees but from impaled human flesh? In June 1462, under the harsh sun of a Balkan summer, Sultan Mehmed II, the mighty monarch of the Ottoman Empire, led a large army into Wallachia, a wild land that is now southern Romania. His goal was not vague: to expand Ottoman power across the Balkan Peninsula, pushing Constantinople's influence deep into the heart of continental Europe. However, as the army approached the capital of Targovishte, they encountered neither soldiers nor fortresses, but instead witnessed a breathtakingly barbaric scene. Before their eyes stretched a forest that grew not from tree roots but from human flesh. Tens of thousands of bodies were pierced straight through by sharp stakes, erected high into the sky, as if hell had sprung up on the ground. There were men, women, old people, and children, some of them rotting, some as fresh as if they had just been nailed, and most horrifying of all, some still gasping, groaning weakly in excruciating pain. The scene was not the product of a sudden madness, but the culmination of a ruthless strategy orchestrated by Vlad III, known to later generations as Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Impaler. Faced with an overwhelming Ottoman force, Vlad knew he could not win by force. Instead, he chose to instill fear not as a warning, but as a massive mass torture ritual. The stakes were meticulously arranged like a demonic army, some even impaling entire families, mothers and children, driven into the same tree trunk as if life was being pinned to death in the mother-child bond. Records from contemporary witnesses, such as Austrian diplomat Johann Schildberger, show that even Mehmed, a king who had fought through countless massacres, was left speechless by the indescribable scene. It is said that after seeing the Forest of the Living Dead, Sultan Mehmed II uttered a chilling sentence: "It is impossible to subdue a land that lies at the hands of the one who can create this." And then he turned around and retreated, leaving behind not only Wallachia, but also a horrifying mark in the history of medieval warfare. This is not a rare phenomenon or a morbid idea that emerged out of nowhere in the Middle Ages. In fact, impalement, an ancient and barbaric form of execution, has been deeply rooted in human history as a symbol of terror and control. Its purpose has never been simply to end a life. Pain is central. Those condemned often endured hours, even days, in a state of limbo, their bodies tortured, their minds crushed, and their souls torn apart by pure fear. As far back as ancient Babylon, around 1750 BC, the Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest legal documents ever recorded, prescribed impalement for crimes such as adultery or treason. At that time, the perpetrator was usually stabbed with a sharp stake through the abdomen or chest, sometimes from behind. Although terrifying, death came quite quickly, within minutes to an hour. The goal was execution, not endless suffering. However, as history has often shown, human cruelty knows no bounds. Nearly a millennium later, in the 9th century BC, the fearsome Assyrian king, Ashurnasirpal II, took this punishment to a new level of horror. After suppressing a revolt, he had hundreds of his enemies captured, some burned alive, others impaled through the anuses and hung vertically from the city walls. According to ancient inscriptions, he even used their skin to cover the walls as victory carpets. The descriptions were not exaggerated. Ancient Assyrian reliefs depict bodies impaled through the perineum, dangling as a bloody warning. Still, even the savagery of the Assyrians could not compare to the so-called art of slaughter, developed centuries later by Vlad III, nicknamed the Impaler. Unlike traditional spikes, Vlad used large, well-lubricated blunt stakes that would not penetrate internal organs but would slowly separate tissue. Victims, Both male and female were placed face down, their hands bound, and the stake was inserted into the body through the anus or vagina. The goal was not to kill, at least not immediately, but to keep them alive for as long as possible in extreme pain, making every movement a torture. For Vlad, death was a spectacle. He did not just execute, but used torture as a comprehensive deterrent. Each body impaled on a stake was not just a victim, it was a message, written in blood and suffering, to any enemy who dared to defy him. How brutal was it enough to hold a throne? One of the most barbaric methods of execution in the Middle Ages was the impalement of the stake, and when the tip of the stake was driven through the upper body, usually below the collarbone or through the neck, the process became even more gruesome. The executioners did not simply finish off their victims, they were artists of pain. They used a large hammer, striking the head of the stake so that it penetrated the bone and became embedded deep into the body. The victim, still conscious, still alive, was lifted into the air, where the weight of his own body drove the stake deeper, inch by inch. In successful cases, if the executioner's hand was skillful enough not to puncture the internal organs too quickly, the victim could struggle and live in a state of torture for 2 or 3 days, crying, trembling, and begging for death. It was in this hellish picture that the name Vlad III, also known as Vlad Tapes, became a symbol of horror, not only because of war, but because of deliberate cruelty. He did not kill out of rage. He executed like a surgeon, careful, precise, and cold to the extreme. In 1457, just 2 years after taking power over Wallachia, he summoned the nobility to an Easter feast. The atmosphere seemed peaceful, laughter rang out, good wine flowed endlessly, and trays of steaming meat filled the hall. Some of the guests began to think that the rumors of Vlad's cruelty were perhaps exaggerated. But then, in the middle of the feast, Vlad suddenly asked, seemingly harmlessly, "In your lifetime, how many Wallachian princes have you seen crowned?" Some said 3, others 5. And then an old man said in a trembling voice, 15. Vlad's smile faded. His voice was cold as steel. "So you are loyal to no one?" The question was a trap, a direct blow to the unstable political reality and the fickleness of the aristocracy, who had repeatedly changed allegiances to protect their positions. Vlad believed, and there was plenty of evidence to support this, that it was some of the people at the party that had betrayed his father, leading to the tragic death of his brother, who was burned blind and buried alive. Without further explanation, he ordered the arrest of all the guests. On the spot, he stabbed the oldest man to death in a bloody prelude before the stunned eyes. The rest were forced to watch as their friends died on bloody stakes, their screams echoing hauntingly. Those who survived were bound, chained, and forced to move toward the ruins of an old fortress, where they were forced to work until they died of exhaustion. The lesson was inscribed in every stake. The enemy was not just beyond the borders, it was hidden in the clinking of glasses and oaths of allegiance. Vlad did not use diplomacy. His weapon was pure, relentless, non-negotiable fear. If you think history has buried the most barbaric forms of execution with the cruelest dynasties, the truth will make you shudder. One of the most haunting punishments ever used by man is the stake, not only because of the pain it causes, but also because of the way it has been reborn, changing over time and culture, as if humanity could never get enough of its own cruelty. Often associated with Vlad III of Wallachia, the figure whom history has dubbed the Impaler, this form of execution did not originate with him. On the contrary, Vlad was just one prominent link in a long line of ancient dynasties and societies that used this method to spread terror. When he died in 1476 and his head was sent to Constantinople as a symbol of victory, The stake had not yet stopped its journey into human flesh. Different empires from late medieval Europe to the Ottoman Middle East adopted and refined this brutal execution method in their own ways, but with the same goal: to completely destroy the condemned person's body and mind, while also sending a deadly message to the community. One of the most vivid accounts comes from Jean de Thévenot, a French merchant who traveled to Egypt in the 17th century. In his account, the person being executed was tied up and placed face down. A small incision was made at the anus. Instead of allowing the blood to flow freely, a mixture of flour and resin was applied to temporarily stop the bleeding, keeping the victim alive long enough. A sharpened wooden stake, greased to reduce friction, was then slowly driven into the body with a wooden hammer. When the head of the stake penetrated the chest or neck, a support was inserted to prevent the body from collapsing too soon, as a quick death was not what the executioner wanted. Jean describes a man hanging from a stake, moaning for hours, begging passers-by to kill him, not out of pain, but out of desperation. When night fell and no one came to his aid, the executioner returned, hammering another blow into the base of the stake, driving the spike straight through the heart. The body was left until morning, when the stench forced a cleanup. The horror was that the whole process was not an exception, but a formality, part of a legal system enforced by terror. And if anyone thought that such barbarism had ended with the spread of the Enlightenment, they would have to look again. In the 18th century, in Dutch-occupied Suriname, the colonial government adopted an even more gruesome variation for resisting slaves. Instead of using stakes, they used curved iron hooks, which were driven through the ribs and hung upside down. The body's own weight would slowly tear the flesh apart, creating a drawn-out death where every minute was torture. Even during World War II, in the age of industrialization and bombers, the ancient nightmare resurfaced in a more subtle and silent form. Japanese soldiers were accused of using the bamboo shoot method of execution, where prisoners were tied to the ground with live bamboo shoots underneath. These shoots, growing at a rate of a few centimeters a day, slowly penetrated the human body, penetrating soft tissue, muscles, and even internal organs. No weapons, no guards, just time and nature. The victim was kept alive with water and a little food, just to prolong the pain until the bamboo penetrated the entire body. The question is, why did people choose such a time-consuming and gruesome way of killing? Why not just quickly? The reason lies not in justice, but in control. The stake did more than penetrate the body and penetrate the collective mind. It was the most vivid warning. Whoever resisted power would be made an example of. Each painful death was a vivid message to the living. And even today, while the method may have disappeared from official law, its memory lives on. In books, legends, and in the dark corners of the world where the light of human rights has not yet shone, the stake, the iron hook, or the bamboo shoot may still be waiting for the next victim. We often look at history in terms of the number of battles, the number of victims, the treaties, but there is one aspect that is often forgotten: the physical and mental destruction suffered by each individual. No chart or report can convey what it feels like to be impaled with a sharp stake. What goes through the mind at that moment? How does the body react? What is death not as a short word, but as a series of truly horrific experiences? The brutality of a capital punishment cannot be understood by listing the victims or analyzing the methods of execution. We must touch the invisible skin of history, where the victims have no names, only silent screams and pain are engraved in every cell. To feel that, we must explore not only the history, but also the anatomy, the neurological responses, and the survival instinct pushed to the absolute limit. As the stake began to penetrate the body, it was not a clean stab. It was a slow, gradual infiltration of each layer of muscle being stripped away, each nerve screaming in a searing pain like boiling oil. The flesh was not severed, but stretched to the point of tearing, as if the body was being reshaped by an invisible and cruel hand. The sensation was not a simple pain, but a slow, relentless rape. As the victim was lifted high, suspended in the air, no longer in control of his own body, life gradually became a burden. He could not breathe because his muscles no longer obeyed. Some had convulsions, many vomited, defecated uncontrollably. The body's desperate biological reflexes were failing. The skin became tight, blood was forced to the limbs, and their faces were distorted, contorted, frozen in a state of utter terror. However, what makes people shiver the most is not the pain but the duration. If the executioner is skilled, they can avoid vital organs such as the heart, lungs, or liver, causing the victim to not die immediately, but to fall into a state of struggle that lasts for hours, even days. During that time, the victim begins to lose direction. They hallucinate, become delirious, beg for release, or simply remain silent with lifeless eyes, staring into space, as if life were just a nightmare from which there is no awakening. The executioners know how to turn pain into a message. If they want to end it quickly, they will stab straight into the internal organs. But if the goal is to instill fear, they will guide the stake along the spine, skillfully avoiding every vital point, prolonging the torture hour by hour, second by second. In the end, the victim died not from the wound, but from exhaustion, from dehydration, from the skin being burned by the sun, or simply because the body no longer had a reason to exist. It was no longer the death of an individual, but a ritual of fear. A death not for punishment, but for deterrence. And Vlad III, the so-called Dracula, understood this better than anyone. He not only stabbed his body, but also stabbed into the collective memory. Each stake erected was a declaration of power, a transformation of pain into a tool of rule. So, as history closes a bloody chapter, what have we really learned? More than just a torture method, impalement has been a chilling symbol of ruthless power and resigned silence. Over the centuries, the sharp stakes have not only pierced the body, but also pierced the human conscience. Even though we try to forget, covering the dust of time over those painful memories, they still lie there smoldering, aching, like a blade that has never been pulled out of the collective memory. You have just gone through a journey not for the faint-hearted. It is not just a stroll into the past, but a naked confrontation with the darkest nature of humanity itself. You have witnessed the silence between the screams buried by time, felt the price to pay when hatred overcomes humanity. And now, as the door of the story closes, you can go in two directions. On one side is the continuing truth, where the ghosts of history have not yet rested. On the other side is the promise of other stories that are still creepy, but never lie. Whichever way you choose, you have crossed the threshold of understanding, and there is no turning back. After all, will you be the one looking back, or the one continuing to go deeper into the darkness?